There are always going to be a range of threats, and therefore you need a range of capabilities to be able to match those threats.
That you prepare yourself for the wars that you really cannot afford to lose.
When you need armoured vehicles, nothing else will do. When you need tanks, nothing else will do.
If you abandon combined arms manoeuvre, the cost will be felt in the future when your army fails.
Hello. This film explains how the British Army will fight in the future following the Strategic Defence and Security Review of 2010. It will demonstrate how the Army intends to confront the changing threats facing the United Kingdom and her interests around the world. Now, war has been a persistent trait of our species, although factors such as technology have altered the character of conflict over the centuries. The fundamental nature of conflict hasn't changed. Traditionally, the Army has faced threats from land, sea and air. But today we need to prepare for additional threats, including satellite technology and cyberspace. Now, we have asked commanders, military historians and other subject matter experts to be open and frank in expressing their personal views on how the British Army should move forward into the future. So then, what are the threats facing this country?
The world's a very dangerous place and we do not know what's going to come down the track. The only thing we're certain of is that the future will be uncertain and things will take us by surprise.
Afghanistan is not a template, and neither was Iraq, neither was Sierra Leone, neither was Northern Ireland. So we need to be very careful about sort of fighting the last war.
There are always going to be a range of threats, and therefore you need a range of capabilities to be able to match those threats.
We didn't foresee the collapse of Yugoslavia and the need for peacekeeping troops to be sent to the Balkans. We did not foresee what would happen after 9/11.
What we do need to do is be prepared for, all eventualities, to respond to events probably that we haven't predicted.
I mean, if you had told people in the 1990s that we may have to send troops to fight in Afghanistan, they would have looked at you as if you were insane. You prepare yourself for the wars that you really cannot afford to lose.
I think Afghanistan has shown us that there will be war fought in the cities, in Kandahar or Lashkar, wherever else it is, but there will also be villages and townships adjacent to that, which will be linked to the city and which you will be required to dominate as well. And those spaces are going to be spaces where your opponent will exploit them if you're not able to match him in them. And it's in those sorts of environments that you need the traditional capabilities to be able to pull together and integrate to achieve the effect against your opponent.
The Army approaches any conflict by using what it calls combined arms manoeuvre. In essence, it takes with it to the battlefield a fighting philosophy, manpower and, more importantly, the right equipment. It may not use all of its kit during each conflict, but it does need a wide range of assets at its disposal.
Both phrases mean something. Combined arms means using all of the assets available to you, maybe land, sea and air, but also political. And the manoeuvre part is to use all of those assets in a synergistic way to get inside the decision-making system of the enemy so that you move faster than them, you think faster than them, and you decide faster than them. And by getting the right people in the right place at the right time, you fight them more efficiently.
Whilst initially you may not require armour, it should be available because you may need it later. On the other hand, you may want to go lighter, and so you need the ability to have lighter vehicles. And so you need to be able to be responsive to the changing dynamics.
Well, it's the integration of a range of different capabilities, whether it be armoured vehicles, artillery systems, what is delivered by air power through bombs or missiles, aviation, and any other capability you can mention to achieve a common effect.
It's a mindset, it's understanding what it's all about, how you get the best out of the various capabilities, putting them together to get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak.
Now, in terms of equipment the Army has at its disposal on a battlefield, it would be reasonable to assume, would it not, that as time goes on, its box of tools, so to speak, needs periodically updating and rebalancing to meet potential threats. For example, do we have a requirement for improved intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance?
Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, ISR assets, UAVs, everything that we're focused on either the IED fight or on the insurgents. There's both kinds. And you never have enough of those type capabilities.
So, as we invest in new intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance technology, is there then not an argument for removing the traditional assets, such as tanks or heavy artillery, from the toolbox? Does a modern army still need what many consider to be Cold War relics?
The benefits a Challenger 2 or a main battle tank brings are huge.
When people think about the old heavy metal of the army, I think it's clear that we may not need as much of it in the future for the sort of operations we might go into. You still need some of it. When you need armoured vehicles, nothing else will do. When you need tanks, nothing else will do.
Well, that's all well and good, but what about the Apache attack helicopter? Could the army, for instance, not ditch the heavy metal and replace it with what some believe is the ultimate weapons platform?
What, of course, helicopters can't do is to provide you with that permanent presence and that precision fire in all weathers on the ground at the time, and give you that sense of heavyweight capability, which of course acts in coercive terms and other terms on the minds of your opponent.
If you've got a attack helicopter, which are an absolutely fantastic asset, and they can see further than a tank and they can fire further than a tank, then why do you need tanks? But the fact is, an attack helicopter can only stay up in the air for about 4 hours. If you have a tank with you, it's with you for the duration of the operation.
We only have so many of those helicopters. And of course, if you've got a brigade or two deployed in the field, the helicopters may only be able to support one action at any one time. The other brigade will need other capabilities to give it the independence of action that it might need for its particular task and function.
So, if we accept that there is still a place on the modern and future battlefield for some of the traditional assets, can't we simply rely upon our allies, and more specifically the Americans, to provide them? Isn't it fair to assume that in the future it is highly unlikely that the British Army will need to fight on its own? By way of example, at the moment in Afghanistan, we're quite happily relying upon the Danish to provide their own Leopard 2 tanks.
Everywhere I go, you come and you're always in need of something. And again, the things that I have specifically in my last couple tours in Iraq, most recently, was everything from counter-rocket artillery mortar capability to ISR capability to Apaches to artillery, etc.
If I think the Americans, if they saw us losing our sort of high-end armour warfighting capability, because that's effectively what it could be, they would begin to doubt whether we would in the future be able to play our part in some of the more difficult, challenging operations, which undoubtedly will come about. Start to question our value as an ally. Maybe not as far as that, but I think they would start to question our ability to go with them, and that would be bad news.
I think you just got back from Basra. I don't know how far back you looked at what you did, but it clearly impeded your ability in Basra to do certain operations based on a lack of capabilities.
The relationship with America is fundamental to our future in the 21st century, and part of that relationship, is military. The Americans have always valued our military contribution, and we've made it in lots of different ways, and we worry about our military contribution to any US operations. The issue we face now is whether we are falling below what I would call the threshold of strategic significance. We could plug into an American operation, we could be very useful, we do quite a useful job, but it makes no real strategic difference. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is it that can make a genuinely strategic contribution to operations that we might do with the United States? And that means having organically independent forces, whether they're ground, air, maritime forces. They have to be capable of taking on a job and doing it themselves without borrowing from the Americans themselves all the time and without needing the Americans to come and support them at some point. What they value is the ability to give the Brits a piece of the territory, leave them to get on with it, and know that it will be done, and that what is done makes a strategic difference. That's the yardstick by which I think we have to measure ourselves now against the Americans for the future.
So, in summary, is the British Army, post-SDSR, ready to fight whatever battles emerge over the next decade or beyond? Now, history tells us that with a wide-ranging array of the right equipment, the combined arms manoeuvre approach has stood the test of time. And according to the experts, it will endure into the future.
I suppose the lesson from history over cost is that if you abandon combined arms manoeuvre, the cost will be felt in the future when your army fails.
There's always a temptation to say that we can fight wars in cyberspace. There's a great glamour about that, and that's true to an extent. And there's a concept now of hyper-competition, that the great powers, the newly emerging powers, compete with each other through every means available to them, through military, through economic, through manipulation of their currency, through energy, through culture. Hyper-competition. That's true. And most conflicts do not involve physical violence, but some of them do.
We always have to be ready for the idea of the strategic shock, the event that we just simply cannot anticipate, which has consequences that we cannot predict. Look at North Africa right now. Look at the wave of revolutions across the Arab world. All being well, it will be another 1989. But we have to allow us for the possibility of negative consequences, which will have an impact on our security that may require us to fight.
Well, you look into your crystal ball and you're trying to divine what the future is, and there's only one historical law, and that's the law of unintended consequences. And you start removing one essential aspect of the all-arms battle, and you can almost guarantee that something really very bad is going to happen further down the line.
The monetary cost is something that you deal with in the present, and these are always difficult issues. But the real cost comes in the future. When, if you find that you're lacking one of those cards, one of those units that you really require on a particular battlefield, that's when your opponent is going to trump you, and you're going to find that the real cost is in human life.
If you actually don't have a combined arms maneuver, if you leave out one of these aspects, if, for example, you abandon artillery, or if you don't have enough infantry on a battlefield, then the likelihood is you're going to be defeated.
When a conflict comes down to the will to prevail in a physical competition, then you need the military. And when you need the military, nothing else will do, literally nothing.